I will now take leaders' questions under Standing Order 27. I call Deputy Colm Keaveney.
Thank you, Laskin Corla. Tánaiste, I cast your mind back to November 2012, when the people of this country went to a referendum to amend the Constitution to provide for children's rights. You remember some of the rhetoric. Government spin at the time was to ensure that children were to be front and centre of all public policy in this country. And unfortunately, Tánaiste, the actions of your government in the meantime in this area can be said to be slack. You've cut guidance counsellors in this country, cut child benefit, you've cut core welfare payments to under-25s in this country. Tánaiste, would you acknowledge the publication today of a report into mental health services in this country? And in that, would you acknowledge some of the startling details with respect to the welfare of children who this morning are waiting for over a year to access mental health services in this country? As we speak here this morning, Tánaiste, 3,000 children are waiting to access, 3,000 vulnerable children are waiting to access services. 400 of those children have been waiting over a year. Tánaiste, the report is quite startling in that it confirms what we've been saying to you for quite some time, in that community mental health services for children in this country has been shattered by this government, and in fact only 42% of the complement of staff that are required to protect the most vulnerable people in our society were only in situ last year. Tánaiste, the report confirms something quite startling, and it's something that we have raised with you before. Tánaiste, 1/3 of vulnerable children in this country who access mental health services are being admitted onto adult wards. Tánaiste, would you give me a date here this morning when you plan to seize the Dickensian action of putting children onto adult wards? And Tánaiste, would you give me confirmation? Tánaiste, will you give me confirmation this morning that best practice is provided for in those adult wards where children are being admitted? And Tánaiste, will you give me assurances to the Dáil this morning with respect to child welfare practices on adult wards where your policy is providing for 1/3 of all admissions of children are being admitted onto adult wards? So, to boil this down, 2 questions, Laskin Corla. When will the government give us a date that the practice will cease for admitting children into adult wards? And are you satisfied that the best practice on child welfare guidelines are in place? Before you give me the answer, I have a PQ on that. And I want you to publicly assure the people of this country this morning that children being admitted to adult wards have the comfort of the best practice and guidelines for their welfare.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tánaiste.
Thank you, and thank you for raising the question. In fact, I think when you're on this side of the House, Deputy, you often praise the government for the priority it had given to children in the context of the very difficult situation that was inherited, and I can remember you on many occasions actually commenting how Fianna Fáil, your current party, had cruelly reduced the supports to families in relation to areas like child benefit, and you were very eloquent on that. And just to remind you, in relation to your comment on child benefit, just to remind you, in relation to your comment on child benefit, that I was very happy to increase child benefit by €5 a month in this year's budget. Not as much as we would like, but we've promised to do the same again next year. Just in the context of your opening comments, Deputy. Secondly, of course, all mental health services are incredibly important, both to adults and specifically to children. And I think it's been recognised and agreed by all parties in the House that the practice of children ending up in services intended for adults is not appropriate, and that the development of child and adolescent mental health services is an absolute priority and has been for my colleague, the Minister of State, Kathleen Lynch, and indeed for the Minister for Health, Minister Varadkar. So just again to put it in context, notwithstanding the severe financial difficulties that the country found itself in at the time of the last election and from 2008. An additional 125 million and some 1,150 posts have been provided for mental health since 2012. And you'll also be aware that there has been a fairly ambitious programme of investment in capital resources and improvements, the actual opening of new mental health facilities, the opening at a local level right around the country, which people can see at the moment, of large numbers of primary healthcare services. And central to the provision of the primary healthcare centres has been the actual provision at a local level of mental health services, including mental health services for children and adolescents. And that, of course, is the setting in which we would like to see children and adolescents who experience mental health difficulties receiving the care, the counselling and the other services which their conditions may require. In fact, seeing children hospitalised would be, I think, for most professionals in the field, the last resort and only in cases where it is possibly the only way of helping a child or an adolescent in very severe difficulties.
Deputy Colm Keaveney, supplementary question.
Tánaiste, as a father of 3 children, I think you've become a cold-hearted technocrat. Your response has been appalling here this morning. I simply asked you, when will your government cease the practice of admitting vulnerable children onto adult wards? You'd be very aware last week of high-profile incidents of inappropriate relationships between staff and service users. I'm asking you to give a date, nothing else, not waffle. Let's pull the curtain back here and look at actually what's happening on the ground. Please give me, the country, the date in which you intend to stop the practice of admitting children onto adult wards. And can you guarantee these people up here today that the practice, best practice prevails with respect to child welfare on adult wards? Are you satisfied that child protection officers exist across adult wards where you admit vulnerable children? Nothing else. Just deal with the 2 questions. Don't go on a meandering road somewhere else about some time in the past. You're in government for 5 years. Deal with it. You're here for the last 20 years, and listen, you're part of the furniture. Just deal with the questions. Vulnerable children. You botched up the referendum. Now is an opportunity. Now is an opportunity to deal with the substantive question here this morning.
Thank you.
A date. When will you cease the admission of vulnerable children onto adult wards? And can you guarantee here this morning the welfare of those children with respect to child protection? That's the key question. Nothing else. No other recall, just those 2 questions.
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, I'm not quite sure why you're referring to a botched referendum in relation to children. Sorry.
Listen to the answer. You're not a Supreme Court.
I think I hear the undertones of another conversation that perhaps Fianna Fáil and others are having, but that's a different issue. Just let me say that the children's referendum was passed in an open vote by the citizens of this country. You may have a different view of it, but you should actually respect the will of the citizens of the country when they voted. So don't be describing it the way you're describing it. The second point is, as I said to you, and by the way, we're 4 years in government, you know, and that's a 20% differential, by the way, on the reality of what you suggested. And I do recognise that you are the father of 3 children and that you are interested in this area, as you said. So let me just take what you've said seriously. We have invested right across the board as a government in children and in children's needs, and let me be very clear about that. And to reiterate, and the committee and the groups of people who have come together in relation to child and adolescent mental welfare issues have acknowledged on a number of occasions and in commentary the progress that has been made. Yes, the progress that has been made. Well, you need to read that, actually, as just opposed. In fact, it actually recognises in that report, if that's what you want to talk about, the progress that has been made by this government in relation to children. It actually acknowledges and recognises it, because I sat down and read the report. You possibly only read the cover. So what I want to say here is that as a government, we are going to continue, as resources permit, to expand our investment in relation to child and adolescents who have mental health difficulties, and in particular to actually make the rollout of the primary care centres, which are now right around the country, the primary location for dealing with children who have problems in relation to mental health, as close to home as possible and with as little inpatient treatment as is only strictly necessary. Because the best way of treating the child is to treat the child, and on many occasions as well to assist the family, the child's family, to cope and to deal with the issues that the child is facing.
Thank you, Tánaiste.
So at the moment, we have, as I said, we have begun and we are investing in an enormous range of additional facilities which are broadening, as we speak, the availability of the resources to children. And that has been acknowledged, Deputy, if you want to be honest in this discussion, by the people who are actually, and the organisation, acknowledged by the people and the organisations who are working in the field.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Now call Deputy Mayor Joan MacDonald.
On Saturday, up to 80,000 people marched through the streets of Dublin. They came from every constituency across the state. They came with a clear message: scrap the water charges or call a general election. What was the Labour Party's response? Well, one of your junior ministers said that it didn't matter how many people marched, the government wasn't for turning. What arrogance. And this week, Tánaiste, you've shown your true colours. You're now threatening hundreds of thousands of families who simply cannot pay the water charge. Labour, it seems, is to become Irish Water's debt collector, sticking your hands into the pockets of families who are struggling to provide for their children or to pay their mortgage or rent. So you send in Alan Kelly, Portro's very own Paulie Walnuts, to put the squeeze on families with nothing left to give. Is this how the Labour Party responds to the will of the people? Is this how the Labour Party helps cash-strapped families? Is this the Labour way? Tánaiste, my questions today are very simple. Do you support Alan Kelly's proposal to raid people's wages, social welfare and pensions? Do you support his proposal to hike up council rents and force landlords to retain deposits? And Tánaiste, since when is it the role of the Labour Party to be Irish Water and indeed Fine Gael's bagman?
Thank you. Tánaiste.
And I suppose your party leader, Jerry, could be described as his Uncle Junior that we know so well from The Sopranos. Just let me say this. Over 1 million people, Deputy, have signed up in relation to Irish Water. And are you suggesting that that 1 million plus people who actually want to see a proper water system in Ireland, who want to see the scandal of there being 40 plus rivers and lakes in Ireland which are being polluted by raw sewerage being dumped into them, and people who want to see safe and healthy water? That's my priority. And you're suggesting that the people who marched on Saturday, who have a democratic right to march, but who, according to the Garda reports of the figures, I understand it was 25 to 30,000, which is a sizable number of people. That the 1 million people who want to see a proper water system in this country, that you as a party want their interest in having a proper water system denied. Now, you have actually tricked and tracked on this issue, because we know at one stage you were actually prominently and strongly in favour of a well-managed water utility which would bring safe drinking water to this country to provide, and it's on the record of the House. Don't be shaking your head. Don't be shaking. You were actually also, you know, and I know you've been U-turning on this so much that at times you must be dizzy. But you were actually going to pay yourself until subsequently you thought about it, and then you thought maybe you wouldn't. Now, maybe you will, maybe you won't. We don't know yet. But can I just say, what my interest, your interest is in the next general election. Your interest is in the next general election, and only in the next general election. My interest is in the next generation. And I want to see our generation of children and grandchildren actually having a clean supply of water for their health, for the development of the economy of this country, for tourism and from agriculture. And only somebody in denial like your party, where the actual future of the country seems to matter less than the electoral future of your own party, would actually suggest that there is no need to have an actual serious large programme over the next 10 to 20 years in the capital investment required to build the water system that I've spoken about. There's a major capital cost in achieving the goal, and what I want to see is not Sinn Féin ducking and diving, as you have been doing in relation to water charges. You know, it's easy to be populist. It's harder to look after the future of our country and the future of our children and our grandchildren. So I support the work of Minister Kelly in actually bringing a proper investment plan and structure for water development in this country. We should have, as a country, actually started this about 30 years ago. We've 34 separate local authorities. We've 34 separate local authorities. Already we know in Dublin that Irish Water, by changing the work on the Ringsend treatment system, is actually going to make a saving for the taxpayer of 70 to 80 million and produce a better water treatment system for Dublin.
Thank you.
Now, it is a big undertaking to set up a new utility, and I understand any payments that people have to make can always be difficult for people to make. But this year, I'm happy to say, in relation to people on average industrial earnings, we have been able to improve their after-tax income by something like up to €30 a month. And in relation to people in receipt of social welfare, we have been able to have modest improvements for people on social welfare to improve their standard of living. And the assessment of the budget shows that that has actually benefited the average family, including particularly people on social welfare, to an amount of roughly, on average, €6 a week. And that is a very significant achievement from where we came. And we need the investment in Irish Water. We need a proper water system. I want to hear Sinn Féin commit to clean water. Commit to clean water for the whole country, including the border areas.
Thank you. Deputy Mary Lou McDonald.
Well, every time this issue arises here, and every time you in particular, Tánaiste, you get to your feet to do a tour around the world in verbal terms, you just confirm yet again just how distant you and your colleagues are from the realities of life for so many people on the ground, certainly the people that I represent. So, the persons that you refer to are the net beneficiaries of €6. 6 whole euros. And what you're effectively doing is rendering that null and void. You know, by the way, the people in receipt of the €6 are struggling so badly that very many of them are in debt. Some of it is to debt collectors and in really bad circumstances. Is there a part of the collective brain of the Labour Party that just doesn't get that? Or that has forgotten that? Has forgotten that? So, Tánaiste, with the greatest of respect to you, it's all the one to me, but you see all of those families don't appreciate your condescending rhetoric, suggesting that somehow they don't understand the value of a clean water supply. Or suggesting, as some of your other colleagues have, that really those who can't pay are nothing more than scroungers. That's quite something coming from the Labour Party, and it's not lost on the people.
Thank you.
Last November, Tánaiste, I asked you to confirm whether or not you were planning to come the heavy with those unable to pay the water charges. You might remember that occasion. You bumbled, you blustered, and as usual, you didn't answer the question.
Put a question, please, Deputy.
But even then, you knew what the plan was. You knew, and you know today as we speak, that despite all of your talk about putting money back in people's pockets, that your real intention is to take it straight back out again, with attachment orders, council rent increases and deposit retention. That's the reality. Now, when you take your feet, in addition to, no doubt, a very elongated exposition of something, could you just do me a favour, and could you answer very clearly, in the clearest of terms, that yes, you do support Minister Alan Kelly in his enterprise to pickpocket wages, social welfare and pensions?
Thank you.
Can you just confirm that that is the case? That's your position and the position of the Labour Party.
Thank you, Tánaiste. We're on supplementary questions now.
Well, that was quite a wanderly wagon trip, wasn't it? I don't know what exactly you had in mind. But just let me repeat the facts, Deputy. And I know facts are often awkward for yourself to deal with. In the budget for this year, we actually had a social welfare package which provided for an increase in relation to child benefit. That's a fact. I presume you noticed it. Secondly, for the living alone allowance. Thirdly, we reinstated on a partial basis the Christmas bonus, all of which, by the way, strongly welcomed by the people of Dublin Central. And by the way, in the 1 million people who've signed up to Irish Water, there are people who live in every different part of the country, including your constituency and my constituency. And I'm sure that hasn't escaped your attention. But what you're actually suggesting is that there should be one law for Sinn Féin and one law for everybody else. One law for Sinn Féin, one law, so that the people who've signed up and who want and are willing to pay for the investment into a future clean water supply, and we have to finance it. There isn't actually a fairy pot of gold for this country in relation to investment. We actually have to provide a pattern of investment in this country. You're addressing that issue in the north at the moment, where you're actually going to let thousands of civil servants go in order to meet the financial requirements of your party being in government in the north and addressing the financial issues of the north. So we have to address financial reality. And 1 million people have signed up, over 1 million people, households, have signed up to Irish Water. Just let me say that for people at work, so those people who are at work, for instance, received reductions in the USC, which I think you support, so you must have read about that, and reductions in relation to income tax. So yes, as a country, we're in recovery. We're actually, last year and this year, will have an extra 40,000 people at work. That will provide more resources to actually fund the vital services of the country. But for water, we need to invest over a long period of time.
Thank you.
And if you're asking me again, do I support the work that Alan Kelly has done to bring in affordable charges of a net of €60 a week, €60 a year for a single individual, and a net of €160 for a family of 2 adults plus children? Do I support the work that he has achieved in reframing the charges for Irish water? Yes, I strongly support that.
Thank you,
I strongly support it.
Sorry, last count, point of order. Last count, Last count,
there are no points of order.
We've went through this drama last November. I hope we don't have to go through it again. I want to establish.
Sorry.
I just wish the Tánaiste.
Sorry, Deputy.
I wish the Tánaiste to answer yes or no. Do you support the plan for attachment orders to wages, social welfare and pensions? Pardon me?
Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan has the floor. I'm calling Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan. And please, I'd like to have some order. Sorry, could we have order, please, for Deputy O'Sullivan?
I think we all know the effects of being unemployed and the feelings it creates in people of feeling worthless and feeling inadequate, and of hopelessness and mental health issues that follow. And we know the effects on relationships and on our communities. And I think when jobs are lost, particularly in rural communities, so much more is lost as well. And I know you're going to tell me that unemployment figures are going in the right direction, and you'll tell me about the various programmes and about initiatives for unemployment people, for education and for retraining, in order to get them back into the workforce. And yes, I know that some of those are progressing well. But there are certain people in the country who are not allowed to register as unemployed on the live register. And because of that, they don't have access to the various job activation programmes and educational retraining. Now, we have the unemployed population divided into registered unemployed and all the entitlements that brings, and then we have the unregistered unemployed who have no legal recognition really from the state, and so really no real entitlements on job activation and on education programmes. And these unregistered group belong particularly to 2 groups. One, those who are known as self-employed, and women who may have opted out of the workforce to rear their families and now want to come back into the workforce. And looking at your advisory committee, I was struck by 2 quotations. One is that the eligibility criteria for non-income support-based training schemes should be modified to enable self-employed people gain access to such schemes. And also that recent trends towards greater flexibility and casualisation have resulted in some workers being classified as self-employed, whereas they really should be determined as employees. So this has created a minority group within the unemployed population being excluded from registering on the live register. So I want to ask, because all job activation programmes and measures are not open to all unemployed, what are those groups supposed to do? What are they entitled to do in order to get back into the workforce? And is there some statutory basis or some constitutional basis for dividing the unemployed into registered and unregistered?
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Thank you, Deputy. First of all, in relation to the calculation of unemployment, and obviously every person who's unemployed is somebody who is on the live register and has actually gone and registered with the Intrio services in my department, and thank you for your comments in relation to how much they have improved. And I recognise that what you're saying is that you would like to see more people being able to avail of the activation services. I don't disagree with that, Deputy, but you will understand that when we came into office, we inherited a situation, and people might recall it, where the unemployment rate was tipping 15%. It was in the late 400,000s. And I have to say, I had a lot of sleepless nights worrying that it would actually go over 500,000 people because of the mess that our friends in Fianna Fáil had left behind. Now, you'll understand, Deputy, I hope, that because literally of the sheer volumes of people who are unemployed, we decided as a government to give absolute priority to getting people who are on the live register back to work. And to do that, we've basically turned the Department of Social Welfare, as people who use the services will be aware, right around. It was a department which just paid out income support. It's now a department which actually runs a public employment service where we work with employers, both in the private and the public sector, to help people who have become unemployed to get jobs. Your proposal, Deputy, that we would extend that to other groups of people, such as, for instance, people who haven't been on the register for a variety of reasons, as you describe. And I accept, by the way, your description. As we get the numbers of people on the live register down, and the latest figures show that the numbers on the live register have been falling, and I'm happy to say this, very dramatically this year. So far, and we're just into the third month of the year, so that our unemployment live register rate is now just about 10%. As that comes down, I certainly look forward to a situation where we will be able to extend activation opportunities to the people that you're describing, particularly in relation to opportunities for people to go back to education and training. Because what I want for people is that they get a well-paid job and that we invest in people's skills so that they get a well-paid job which is likely to last. And I know as well from my recent visit to the United States to promote Ireland around St. Patrick's Day, that there are tremendous numbers, for instance, of companies from the US interested in using Ireland as a base for employment. A lot of the people that you're describing, who for one reason or another have not been on the live register, would be fabulous employees for some of these companies, but we have to reach out and get more training and education opportunities in particular, so that the people that you're describing can actually get and benefit from the enormous increase in jobs which is going on at the moment. So it's a situation I keep under review absolutely constantly, and as the numbers come down, we should be able to make more opportunities available for the people you're describing.
Tánaiste, Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
I come back to the point that if there are people who are unemployed and they're not on the live register, well then the figures, the unemployed figures on the live register are not giving an accurate picture of those who are unemployed in the country. I just look at, say, Springboard, for example. I mean, the idea there is that preference is given to those who are long-term unemployed. And that's what I'm told. And I also look at, why would an employee take on somebody who's not on the live register, because they will be depriving themselves of other benefits that they get when they do take somebody from the live register. But there's another aspect, and it came from last week's report from the Nevin Institute. Now, it did give a relatively positive picture of recovery, but it did have very serious concerns about the low paid. 25% of employees, which is about 345,000 in the labour force, earn an hourly wage of less than the living threshold of €11.45, and some 60% of those low paid are women. So while on one hand you're saying people are coming off the live register, but if they're going into employment that doesn't allow them to live in dignity, well, I think that is really distorting the picture of the progress that's being made on employment. And I'm not somebody who wants to knock the measures that are going on, but I do think we need to be more realistic and be more accurate in the picture. So I hope that you will follow through on looking at the groups I've mentioned today, technically self-employed, young people who can't get onto the live register, and those women who gave up their careers to rear their families and who want to get back into the workforce.
Yeah, again, Deputy, and just to agree with a lot of the points you're making, when I became leader of the Labour Party, I prioritised something that I was able to do, particularly after I became Minister for Social Protection. If you recall, the first thing I did in that first social welfare bill was to actually reinstate the €1 cut that Fianna Fáil and the Green Party had made in the minimum wage in order to bring, well, most of the
Please, Tánaiste.
Fianna Fáil decided to cut the minimum wage by €1 an hour for instance, a woman who was working, say, in a hotel job on a low pay. That actually was probably worth, reinstating the minimum wage was worth about 36 to 40 euros a week to such a woman. Well, I met a lot of them through their trade unions and their other representative groups. And at the time, if I may, and it's Deputy O'Sullivan's question, but you were a strong supporter of the reinstatement. You were a strong supporter of the reinstatement.
Tánaiste has the floor, please.
You were a strong supporter of the minimum wage.
Sorry.
And anyway, can I answer Deputy O'Sullivan?
Could we all settle down?
O'Sullivan?
Please, settle down. Tánaiste. Tánaiste has the floor, please. Sorry. Sorry, excuse me, sorry. I've called the Tánaiste now, please. Tánaiste.
The temporary leader of Fianna Fáil, I have to say, is really not showing due respect to Deputy Sullivan. Just going back to Deputy Sullivan's question, though. Restoring the minimum wage, which had been cruelly cut by Fianna Fáil by €1 an hour, that was the first thing we did. And when I became leader of the Labour Party, I asked my colleague, Deputy Minister Jed Nash, to actually bring together, and it has been established now, a low pay commission in order to deal with the issue of low levels of income. Minister Nash is also at the moment undertaking, at my request, a study of the kind of conditions that you've described, where people have low contract hours. So although they're paid an hourly rate, if you're only getting 10 hours a week or so, it's very difficult to have the kind of financial independence and the wage levels that you need to live a fully independent life and provide for yourself and your family. So we are working on that as a government, and I anticipate that the Low Pay Commission report will actually come to Cabinet sometime at the end of July, and that it will form part of the Cabinet deliberations in respect of the forthcoming budget, where I hope to make further progress, as well as which, for people on low pay, we've lowered the USC impact, taken 80,000 people this year out of low pay. But going back to the people that you spoke about at the beginning, who for one reason or another are not registered as unemployed, I do think it is important, as the numbers of unemployed people falls dramatically, that we would actually widen out the opportunity to particularly upskill, go back to education, get a qualification, because that is the route to a well-paid job.
Thank you.
And I'll come back to you on that topic.
So, Margaret, that concludes leaders' questions, and shortly we'll go on to the order of business. Tánaiste.
The order